Hello! This is another episode of the EasyRoads3D Inside Tutorial series. Today, we'll be looking into creating and editing side object presets. It is in fact part one of a series of videos covering side objects in EasyRoads3D for Unity. We already saw in previous videos how we can add objects like guardrails, lampposts, walls, and fences to the scene using the EasyRoads3D framework, and how these side objects can be used to enhance the road network and bring your scenes alive in a very effective and easy way. In these videos, we saw that side objects can be activated along the full road, or on specific road sections, and that they can be generated based on rules taking into account the road shape and terrain profile. This last option is very useful to effortlessly and easily auto-generate, for example retaining walls and bridges in those areas where that suits the road and terrain profile. We saw that side objects can also be activated for road types, so they will be generated instantly when creating a new road of that type. The description below includes direct links to all of this. It can be used to refresh your memory if necessary. So side object options are well integrated in the system. We already mentioned lampposts, guardrails, walls, and fences for which the system is most commonly used, but the side objects toolset is versatile and offers options for many different use cases. It is in fact a scene building tool, a framework by itself, and it is all part of the EasyRoads3D package at no extra cost. The examples we will be looking at in these side object videos are all included in the free demo package, but since this is a framework, you are not limited to what is provided in this package. You can use your own assets and create your own side object presets. And that is exactly what we will be looking at in this side object tutorial series. Creating your own side object presets, getting familiar with this system, all the options, and knowing how the system can be used will also help getting new ideas for your scenes, enhance your scenes further, and bring them alive. Let's have a look at this. Side objects are created and edited in the Side Object Manager, the second tab from the right in the EasyRoads3D toolbar in the inspector. Here at the top, we have a number of options for managing side objects. We can create new side object presets, add new side objects to the scene that were created in another scene or that were not yet added to this scene, manage or remove project side objects. We can import side objects from other projects, and we can export side objects so that they can be imported into other projects. In this series of side object videos, we will be looking into creating and editing side objects. So let's start with adding a new side object. Here we can see that it is automatically selected in the side object dropdown as the active side object, and it will be added to the currently active category tab. We can change that further below. We will get to that in a minute. We can give the new side object a descriptive name. Here, we can see that there are three side object types. The first is the mesh object type of side object. This is the side object that we will look at in this part 1 video. So let's name this new preset Mesh Object Example. The mesh type of side objects will spawn an object along the road or spline path. This side object type is typically used for objects like lampposts, street signs, and road marker posts, but it can also be used, for example, for fences and specific wall types. We can assign the model or prefab that should be spawned from the project folder here in the source object slot. Let's already do that. Let's create a lamppost side object like the one in the demo package. So we drop a lamppost prefab to this slot. And before continuing here in the Side Object Manager, let's activate this side object on a road so we can actually see what we are doing. As soon as we activate the side object, it is generated along the road. That is how easy this is. The positioning here in the middle is not yet what we want, but we'll get to that in a minute. It's worth mentioning at this point that when the side object is active on the selected road and the focus is on the Side Object Manager tab, you will see a refresh button here. This will quickly update the side object on the road after changes in the Side Object Manager. Ctrl+U does the same. We can use this to quickly visualize changes when setting up the side object. And when just starting with all of this, visualizing changes here in the Side Object Manager is also useful to quickly get familiar with this system. You can instantly see what these options do. Let's continue with the inspector options. First, we have options for standard Unity game object settings, like the game object layer, tag, and whether the object should be marked as static. We assume you have a basic knowledge of Unity and what these options represent. Otherwise, you may want to look that up in the Unity docs. Default active state for each marker. This is toggled on by default. The side object will be active on all markers once the side object is activated on a road. You want to switch this off for side objects that will only be active on a few marker sections. The reason for that is that it is more efficient to activate it for these marker sections than having to deactivate it for all other road marker sections. This default marker active state option is also available for each individual road, and for all road types that have this side object auto-activated. So the final behavior is flexible. Category. The side object category can be set. The side object will also be available in the corresponding tab. So this can be used to organize the side objects. And also, some categories have additional controls specific to that category, like the bridges category. This is also relevant for the next option here in the inspector. Auto-generate. Side objects can be generated based on rules taking into account the road shape and terrain profile. The option is available for side objects in the barriers, walls, bridges and tunnels, and props tabs. Each of these categories has their own set of controls to trigger auto-generation of these side objects. So this is also a reason to use the category option. The lamppost in the demo package is located in the props folder, so let's change the category. Back to auto-generate. When this is checked, it means that we can use the auto-generate option for this side object, and auto-generate will be the default state for this side object. But as you can see here, it is still possible to switch off auto-generate for individual roads, and activate the side object for the full road or specific marker sections. This can be useful, for example, for guardrails. Have them auto-generated based on rules on smaller rural roads with bends or in areas with steep edges next to the road, and generate them along the full road, also for example straight sections for motorway road types. We will be fully looking into setting up rules for auto-generated side objects in Part 4. Meanwhile, using auto-generated side objects in the scene is briefly covered in the introduction tutorial. A quick link can be found below in the description. The next control is source object. We already mentioned this. Here, we assign the prefab in the project folder that we want to spawn along the road or spline path, the lamppost prefab in this case. Prefab childs. This option will be active when the source object includes child objects. There are three options: all, child sequence, and random. By default, the full prefab will be spawned, but optionally, it is possible to spawn these child objects one by one in sequence, or randomly. This can be used, for example, to create random rock formation objects, or fence instances along a spline path. Examples of both are in the demo package, the bootcamp fence. We can see here that we have various versions of the fence. Those versions that we want to appear more often are duplicated, so it is more likely they'll be selected randomly. Let's activate the bootcamp fence. We see that these different fence child objects are indeed spawned randomly. The same for the rocks example. For this side object type, the random X positioning is useful. We see that it is not used by default. The instants are spawned in line, but we can add randomness here, and also individually for specific instances in the scene. Let's continue with the inspector options. Here we have the same random X position control to set default values. Terrain vegetation. It is also possible to add terrain vegetation as side objects. The terrain objects in the scene will be scanned for all available terrain tree prototypes. They will be listed here in the dropdown. In edit mode, the selected tree prefab will be spawned as a reference. In build mode, these instances will be added to the terrain vegetation system. The palm tree side object in the demo package is an example of this. It is also possible to set a minimum-maximum scale range, also useful for vegetation type of side objects, or for example, the rock side objects. Here in this section, we have additional options to control how the object will be spawned. We can set the position relative to the center of the road, the left edge or the right edge. The lampposts are in the center at the moment. We want to position them on the road edge, so let's change that. That is better. When the side object is positioned relative to the left or right side of the road edge, we can mark it as dual-sided. The side object will be generated on both sides of the road, and this is what we want for this lamppost side object. We have two options for the alignment of the other object. It can be mirrored or it can be rotated 180 degrees. In this case, we will just rotate the lamppost instances on the right side 180 degrees, so they point towards the road. Let's refresh the side object, and the lampposts are now indeed generated on both road sides. We can see that by default, the objects will be spawned for both sides according to the below distance between objects value. For objects like these lampposts, you may want to position the left and right posts in pairs relative to the center. Sync left-right will do exactly that. See the difference. Distance between objects. We already mentioned this. This value represents the distance between spawned objects. We can add some randomness to make the end result less artificially computer generated when that suits the side object type. When average by road length is toggled on, the distance between objects value will be recalculated so objects will be spawned at equal distances from the start to the end of the road. We can see that indeed the last post is at the end. When this is toggled off, the distance between objects will be exactly the entered value, and the prefab will be spawned accordingly as long as there is room for a new instance. X position. This sets the final position sideways. We actually want the lamppost slightly away from the road, so let's enter a value. Negative values will move the object to the left, positive values will move it to the right. The default positioning is relative to the left side of the road, so to move the post away from the road, we enter a negative value. This value will be mirrored for the posts on the right side. This X position value can be adjusted per road type, and also per individual road. This is useful when the same side objects will be active on several road types in different positions. For example, lampposts on more narrow roads should probably be spawned outside of the road edge, and for wider roads, with more room at the road edges on the inside. We can easily achieve this with a single lamppost side object by activating it for both road types, and set the X position in the road type setting respectively. We can also change this X position per marker. This can be useful for side objects like fences, winding away from the road on some sections. Random X position. Here too we have a randomness option to make the final positioning less artificial. We already saw how this can be used on side objects like rock formations. Y position. This can be used to fine-tune the Y position relative to the spline path if necessary. Y-axis rotation represents the forward orientation of the spawned objects. Follow path follows the road direction, which is what we want for this lamppost example. Other options are fixed and random rotation. Generally, you want to use follow path. Random rotation can be useful for side objects like rounded road markers, for which only one prefab exists, but with distinct texture variations. By rotating the objects randomly, it will be less noticeable that all instances are based on the same prefab. This, together with the random prefab child option, and in some situations also the random scaling, is a very effective way to spawn many objects only based on a few different variations. Add rotation angle adds an angle to the rotation. This is, for example, used on the sharp turn signposts, to position the instances at a specific angle relative to the road direction. We also see here that by default, this side object will be auto-generated based on rules, the road bend angle in this case. Mesh bounds alignment will align the spawn objects according to the bounds and the alignment of the previous instance. It can be used, for example, for fences that are based on spawn prefab instances. The Match Bounds button is useful in this case. It will set the distance to the bounds of these objects. The Match Bounds button can be used here as a quick reference to align the spawned instances. Depending on the prefab shape, you may want to increase or reduce the value a little bit. There is also an option for an end connection object. Imagine a fence or wall prefab with a midsection and a post at the start. The next instance with the post will connect to the end of the previous instance and so forth, up until the end. But at the end there will be a missing post. This is where the end connection object will be used for. This setup is used on the wall CC side object in the demo package in the version 3.1 scene. The next options are offset related. Default start offset. This can be used to control the start position relative to the road start. Default end offset. The same, but for the end of the road. Let's enter a value for the default start offset. Both offsets can be fine-tuned for each separate side object section on a road in the side object marker section. Note that for the offset at the end of a section, the last marker should be selected for which this side object is active. So at the end of the road, this will be the second last marker. And these two offsets can also be fine-tuned directly in the Scene View window. Ctrl+H toggles this feature on and off. We can drag the handles to change the positioning. So this too is flexible. If offset values are always required, it is a lot more efficient to set them here as the default offset. The next option is Snap to Terrain. The side object will snap to the terrain, also after switching to build mode when terrain heights are adjusted to the road. So when the terrain is adjusted, the side object will adapt to it. This option is useful for side objects that are positioned further away from the road, possibly in the road surrounding zones that are not aligned with the road. The terrain will be adjusted in these areas. These side objects will be repositioned accordingly. And this is also useful to update side objects after manual terrain changes in build mode. Let's take this fence. It may partially disappear after terrain changes, but we can select the fence object and press the refresh button. The fence updates according to the terrain changes. Here, we have more alignment options. Options are none, terrain normal, path forward, path normal. So this controls the rotation relative to the underlying surface. The best suited option depends on the side object type and the position. For terrain-specific side objects, you may want to use the terrain normal option. For example, separate fence objects that should align with gently rolling terrain surfaces. The last option will affect the side object orientation in tilted road sections. This can be used, for example, for walls and fences on oval type of racetracks, but also for decal type of side objects on top of the road surface that should align with the road. Also in tilted sections, which is something to consider when the subtle random tilting feature is used on a road. Usually, you want to keep this at none or one of the last two options. It is easy to experiment with this, see the results, and choose what suits you best. Random rotation angle. It is also possible to add a random additional rotation to the calculated rotation. This can be used, for example, to add random wear or damage to objects like fences and guardrails. The last option is combine objects. This will combine all spawned objects and create a single mesh. Depending on the complexity of the source prefab, this can be used for optimization purposes. Note that this combine option currently does not work yet for source prefabs with a LOD group setup. This button, Update Active Scene Instances, is available for all three side object types. It can be used to update all scene instances of the selected side object after changes to a side object. Okay. That is it for part 1 of the side object tutorial series about the mesh object type of side object. We hope you enjoyed watching it. In part 2, we will be looking at the procedural side object type, which can be used to create other types of barriers, walls, fences, but also for more complex objects like bridges and tunnels. So, to stay informed, you may want to subscribe to this channel if you have not already done that. For now, thanks for watching, and see you in part 2 of this side object tutorial series.